So, hi again, folks. This is my third update of the day. The updates have focused on how Americans feel about their wages, their incomes, also focused on how Americans feel about uh, generally how they feel about the kind of deal that they are getting from the political system in general. And the third of our streams today also continues with that particular theme. Specifically, there are many people who are celebrating. They are celebrating over the fact that there's a coming cost of living adjustment for Social Security that has been set at 8.7%. That's the so called cost of living adjustment is often abbreviated, okay, as COLA. So the Social Security cost of living raise beginning in January, that COLA is 8.7%. It's the highest COLA, the highest cost of living adjustment we have had since the early 1980s, when we were coming off a similar period where we had high inflation and the Federal Reserve trying to fight the high inflation by raising interest rates. The article here I am relying on for this stream is by Robert Kuttner. It was published October 11, 2022 in the American Prospect. It's called Cheers for Social Security's Cost of Living Adjustment. I will share it for you now. Let me get the right tab here. Okay, let's now get into this. You should be able to see it now. Let me see. Yep, you can see it now. I see I've got a few comments. Dolores says, hello, everyone on Facebook. Hi, Dolores. So glad you're here. And Kay, hi to you as well. This is the third stream you've come back for. I won't get much as I'm a low income Social Security. Yeah, Social Security is really bad to low income folks uh, who, during their work lives, had a relatively low income. Uh, Once the cost of Medicare is taken out of their Social Security, they often have very low income to live on. This is very common in the senior development that I live in now. A lot of people getting helped by family, and a lot of people getting low income, which is one of the comments that should be made here and should be emphasized. This may be the most the greatest cost of living adjustment since the 1980s, but it's a cost of living adjustment to fight inflation. It doesn't reflect the fact that for many, many people on Social Security, their payments are so low that they cannot live on the Social Security payments. It's very important to emphasize that. Hey, Lana. Hi, Sandy. Uh, Kay said, in the old days, women worked the low income jobs. Yes, I know. So for older people on Medicare right now, um, such as Bonnie, but for example, she worked in fairly low income jobs as well. And so her Social Security payment is relatively low compared to mine. Uh, there's been some talk about doing something about that. Okay, specifically, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders want to raise everybody's Social Security payment by a flat $200 a month or $2,400 a year. Uh, there are also bills that are in Congress now, not only to do that, but to put a floor on income. I believe one of these bills, if I recall correctly, has specified that the minimum Social Security payment should be set at $1,400 a month, okay, for everyone. That would greatly improve, I'm sure, Kay's income, but also Bonnie's income and the income of many, many other people. There are people where I live who have Social Security incomes of something like $650 a month. No one can live on $650 a month. But let's get back to the article. Cheers for Social Security's cost of living adjustment is the title. It will compensate seniors for the bout of inflation. Workers deserve as much. Here's an old couple walking down the street. The male is evidently blind or very near blind. Okay, a man and a woman leave the supermarket after shopping on July 27th, 2022 in New York. 16.1 million people aged 65 and older are lifted out of poverty each year by Social Security benefits. One other problem with Social Security is that the cost of living adjustments do not take account of the area where you live. A cost of living adjustment of 8.7% means an awful lot more to people who live in low cost areas in Kansas as opposed to high cost areas in New York. Of course, everybody still appreciates the 8.7 cost of living adjustment. But obviously, if you cared about people actually living decently, the cost of living adjustment would be different across the United States. It would be different because it would take into account the changes in the cost of living of where people lived. Generally speaking, those changes are much greater out in California, let's say, than they are, again, in Kansas. On Thursday, the federal government is expected to announce a Social Security cost of living adjustment for 2023 based on the current annual inflation rate. This article was dated October 11th. So Thursday has come and gone. I think. And what was announced was 8.7%. The article says the adjustment is expected to be at least 8.7%, a remarkable benefit for more than 70 million Americans who are the seniors or draw Social Security on some other basis, such as disability or widowhood. This is worth more than a moment's reflection for starters. No other significant part of America's patchwork retirement system has an automatic cost of living adjustment. Before the 401k revolution of the 1980s and 1990s, which was engineered to shift risks from corporations to their employees, very neatly did that, of course. I scrolled down too fast. Let me correct that. About 60% of American workers had traditional, quote, defined benefit, unquote, pension plans. In these plans, the employer guaranteed a pension for as long as the retiree lived, typically based on the worker's wages times years of active service. Most of those pensions also had cost of living adjustments to compensate retirees for inflation. But today, those benefits are mostly gone. Less than 15% of retirees have them, and even fewer of these plans have inflation adjustments. The rest have a mix of IRAs, KEOs, and 401ks, none of which have cost of living adjustments. Even worse, those plans are not pensions at all. They are tax sheltered savings plans, which leave workers with a flat sum upon their retirement, which means that you can outlive your savings, and a typical plan has only enough savings to support a worker for far fewer years than his or her life expectancy. Yes, I had a plan like that coming from my academic days. And of course, I have now outlived that particular plan. Hopefully, I will continue to outlive it. With Social Security, you can never outlive your savings because the checks come for as long as you live. This, among other benefits, is why Social Security is so much better deal than any private scheme. And unlike most private retirement savings plans, such as 401ks, Social Security does not have a commercial fund manager raking off a cut at the expense of the worker retiree. It is also the case that other forms of retirement savings, tax sheltered or otherwise, are vulnerable to the vagaries of the stock market. If you happen to retire when the market is performing well and you are well off enough to even have some money in the stock market, good for you. But if you were planning to retire this fall or continue your living standards in your retirement, the market is down about 20%. Given the Fed's perverse rate hikes, it is likely to remain depressed for a while. But because Social Security is a government program with a 75-year time horizon, it is immune to stock market shocks. That's one of the reasons why you should be very, very opposed to current Republican plans, which in fact are long-standing Republican plans to privatize Social Security and give the trust funds to the market so the market managers can play with it. According to the Economic Policy Institute, which is, by the way, a lefty think tank, not that lefty, but a left of center, the median savings of American workers, including plans such as 401ks, was just 60,000. For the 40% of Americans aged 60 to 69 who even have a 401k, the median holding is about 82,000. But that is enough for maybe 6 or 7 years, while the average life expectancy for a 65-year-old is 18.2 years for men and just under 20 years for women. As reports of the likely 2023 cost of living adjustments have been published, we are already getting comments from the usual suspects that Social Security is too expensive and too dangerous, and the adjustment will only add to its long-term deficit. No other significant part of America's patchwork retirement system has an automatic cost of living adjustment. But too generous compared to what? The average Social Security benefit is just $1,626 a month. And because of the collapse of the rest of the retirement system, two-thirds of the elderly depend on Social Security for at least three-quarters of their income. A study from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities found that's a little bit left of center think tank, but also austerity minded from time to time, found that 16.1 million people aged 65 and older are lifted out of poverty each year as a result of their Social Security benefit. With Social Security, the poverty rate among senior Americans is 9%. It would be closer to 38% without it, according to the CBPP, again, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. By the way, the CBPP is where Jared, what's Jared's last name? I forget. It is escaping me now. Anyway, he's Biden's friend, used to be the chief economist for Biden. He is now on the Council, of Economic Advisors. You might argue that retirees are getting a better deal than workers. Jared Bernstein, sorry. Than workers, most of whom have no cost of living adjustments. Inflation is up around 8.7% over a year ago, but the average worker wage increase is up only 3.8%. But surely the cure for this is to increase wages, not to take benefits away from seniors. I also have to add at this point that the 8.7% for many, for elderly people, is less than, if I recall correctly, it is less than the CPI, the increase in the CPI for the elderly. In other words, if the CPI for the elderly were used instead of the COLA, no, wait, I take that back. That's not true for this year. It's not true for this year. The 8.7% is higher than the CPI for the elderly this year. So that's a good thing for the elderly. What I think I have in mind is that the overall inflation for this year was something like 10.3%. So I think it's still the case that the elderly are falling behind in some sense, so that even though the cost of living increase was a great improvement over the past and looks spectacular, it's still the case that it's lagging behind the rate of inflation now. For it not to be lagging behind the rate of inflation now, what the government would have to do, is to take the high end of the estimates of likely inflation the year before and have that be the cost of living adjustment. In other words, the cost of living adjustment is trying to compensate the elderly for cost of living increases that have already happened and that the elderly have been paying for a good part of a year. And only then, after the costs are incurred, does the cost of living adjustment actually come. No doubt the cost of living adjustment will be very, very welcome, but that doesn't change the fact that the inflation that has already occurred has drained the savings, of elderly people and the bank accounts, of elderly people before the adjustment actually comes in, and the adjustment then doesn't compensate for the drain. But of course, as the article says, The billionaires are doing better than ever. The real economic struggle is the very rich versus everyone else, not average workers versus average elderly people who are the same people at different life stages. Don't forget that Social Security is financed by payroll taxes on wages. When wages lag, so do Social Security receipts. The main reason why Social Security faces a long term deficit is that since the late 1970s, wage increases have not kept pace with productivity growth. So the coming Social Security cost of living increase, which does not give retirees a real benefit increase, but just keeps them even with inflation, is not a moment for fiscal angst. It's a moment for celebration and defense of our best social insurance program. I guess I would put that, okay, in a little different way. It just keeps them even with inflation, but maybe not so even because they've experienced the inflation before they get the cost of living adjustment. But of course, it isn't a moment for fiscal angst because uh, it is a compensation for something that has already happened to them. I agree it's a moment, okay, of celebration, but it shouldn't be too celebratory because it's compensation for a draining that has already occurred, and it is not, okay, a raise in the real income of Social Security recipients. To get a raise in the real income of Social Security recipients, we would have to get things like the $200 a month increase in the Sanders Warren bill. We would have to also get things like changes in the minimum Social Security payment to $1,400 a month. I don't think the $1,400 a month, okay, is enough. But the point is that would be a real increase, okay, in benefits and not just the cost of living adjustment. From time to time, I talk about the retirement programs we have here in America, and I point out, which I will do once again, that uh, compared to some nations in Europe, such as, say, Switzerland, okay, or the Netherlands, or Germany, uh, or France, uh, our retirement benefits that we get from Social Security, uh, in terms of the median Social Security payment, okay, that we get, their median is roughly twice as large, okay, as ours. So their state-sponsored pensions or partly state-financed pensions are much more generous, okay, in terms of European nations than is our Social Security program. Somehow, the European nations have managed to treat their citizens far better when they retire than we treat our citizens. I should also note, since I'm talking about this now, that not only are their citizens treated better when they retire, but the average hours worked per year by Americans, something like I think it's roughly 1,800 hours a year or something like that. At least the last time I looked at that, it was that. If you compare that to the average working year in Germany, for example, I think the figure is something around maybe 1,421 hours a year, uh, perhaps even lower, perhaps 1,395 hours per year. It's in that range. It's also interesting, of historical interest, that uh, when Greece was having its very severe governmental financial problems in 2015, uh, there were lots of Germans, who would go to Greece on vacations, and they would complain, of course, on how lazy the Greeks were. At the time, the average number of hours worked by Greeks, or the median number of hours worked by Greeks per year, was something like 1,860 hours, while the average number of hours for Germans was 1,400 hours. But of course, the stereotype of the lazy Greeks was the ones that the stereotype of the Germans was spreading all over Europe. Anyway, that's just a kind of a side comment. One of the injustices, of history. Because who writes history? Well, actually, it's the wealthy nations who write history, so I guess they get to set the stereotypes. So I will take a few minutes now, since I did actually set a limit for this stream, to go over a few of your comments here. I'm glad enough of you, or more of you, have found this stream than some of the earlier ones. Okay, I know it's hard when the streams don't have advance notice, as they usually have, but that's our new program. In other words, we're streaming, at irregular times. We're streaming more frequently, streaming about the same number of hours, but the times, are rather irregular, because we're trying to keep you updated on the news while we're bringing in our own particular perspectives, including the MMT perspectives, but in the context of news, that's occurring. So that's why the streams, tend to be rather irregular, and will probably get more so. I'm still catching up on some old news, but when I really get current, on a day-to-day basis, then we'll be updating constantly with the 3 streams a day, and then it's going to be very hard to warn you beforehand. I had at least some ability tonight, to produce some warning, but I know not much, and I apologize for that. But the way the new program works, uh, we're mostly looking at getting video views as opposed to live stream views, even though we originally produced the videos as live streams. The longest these videos will be about an hour. With this one, which is the major video of the night, we're running about almost 30 minutes now, and we will run a little longer. So Kay shared her Social Security and said that hers was $725 a month. Kay, is that before your deductions for Medicare, or is it after your deductions for Medicare? In other words, is the $725 what you actually get to spend, or is the $725 does that include what will be subtracted from Medicare? I'm just curious, because that's important to understand that. I mean, what you're living on is after the subtractions for Medicare. Sandy says New York City is expensive. Yeah, LA is awfully expensive too. San Francisco is awfully expensive too. A lot of Florida cities are very, very expensive these days also. Seattle is very, very expensive. Fairbanks, Alaska is very, very expensive. They're more expensive because the price of the assets, the real estate assets, so is going up. So if you rent, the rents are increasingly very high. Brandy says, "Sorry, I'm late. We're talking to my oldest kid that we haven't seen in about a week." And quite understandable, Brandy. Don't apologize. We are glad that you arrived, that you're here. And Kay says 401ks were a scam to replace Social Security back in the beginning. Yeah, I know they were. The Republicans were trying to get people to love them enough to get rid of Social Security altogether, but that never happened, thankfully. But they're still trying. They come in, the libertarians come into the Republican Party now, and they just hate Social Security. To them, it's government dependency. Everybody says hi to each other. And Kay says, "You're doing great, Joe." Well, thank you, Kay. I certainly appreciate that. I've had the feeling that I've been doing well, actually, for, some months now. And Kay says, "Yes, because I'm on Medicare." Sandy leaves a bunch of icons I can't read and 3 hearts, which I can read. Thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you very much, Kay, indeed. She says, "I like the beard." Oh, you notice the beard. Well, the beard is only temporary. It's just because I was too lazy to shave today. I meant to shave this morning, but to confess, I was in a rush. And I just sort of forgot about shaving because we were trying to get out to the store and do some shopping. And I had done too much research for most of the day. So, if there are any more comments, I'll be happy to comment on the comments. Okay, if there are none, I will give you some previews tomorrow. I expect that Lisa will be with me on the main show tomorrow at 9 p.m., even though we have yet but to agree on a topic for that. But I do expect her to be there. And also on Wednesday, and also on Thursday. Okay. Also, I believe Ezra will be joining us on Thursday, and I'm hoping to get him to join us for another show, okay, as well. The way I plan these 2 shows is I generally want to do 2 updates during the day, and then the final update is the team show with Lisa on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then I hope to have guests for the evening shows on Monday and Friday, which will be kind of looking at the day and some of the big issues of the day. Kay calls attention to Larson's Social Security 2100 Act. Yeah, Larson is he's a real friend of Social Security and has been over the years. He's really devoted his life kind of to pushing Social Security. Okay, if I recall, I think it's Jim Larson, isn't it? his support for Social Security is very, very public and very, very solid. And he has a lot of weight in Congress now, too. But to fully appreciate his weight in Congress, we're going to have to get rid of Richie Neal, who tends to pigeonhole everything good in the Ways and Means Committee. Sandy asks if Bonnie likes the beard. Uh, okay. I don't know if Bonnie likes the beard, but I really don't intend to grow one. I did have a beard when I was in college. Then I shaved it off because I was going out and getting my first job, and beards were kind of frowned upon, okay, in those days. And I was very concerned with getting a good job at that point. So I did not have a beard for a number of years. Then I went back to teaching at SUNY Binghamton in 1971. Then I grew my beard again, uh, and then I wore it for some time. I don't remember when I shaved it off again. It was probably after I left the university setting sometime. Uh, I believe I wore a beard during my days as a microcomputer systems integration. Um, okay, I was the president of a microcomputer firm during those days, basically selling boxes in Washington, D.C. to all kinds of companies for about 10 years. I guess my claim to fame was that, okay, I was making the CIA pay in cash for boxes. I wasn't extending any credit to the CIA. It wasn't that I was totally against the CIA then. It was just that I didn't have a lot of credit to rely upon. And so I just insisted that everybody pay up front. And I didn't back off even for the CIA. So it was funny to see them come over with cash for microcomputers. This way. Uh, okay, so Sandy Degg asks, does Bonnie like the beard?
Not really.
She says not really. Most probably for tomorrow's show. Most probably for tomorrow's show, I will have shaved the beard off. Uh, I've decided I don't want to look like the grizzled veteran of a foreign war.
With a fuzzy face.
Sorry, what's that?
With a fuzzy face.
With a fuzzy face, Bonnie says. Kay says, back in Southeast North Carolina, when Scott and I worked in housing, people were cashing in on the 401ks to buy homes. Yes, that was something people did. At one point, I had a 401k, but hey, I had to cash it in because I had a period of unemployment and I had to live. So I cashed in the 401k. And Sandy said, good, the CIA should pay up front. And Dolores Pierce said, hi, Brandy. And Sandy said, oh, well, Joe, it's got to go. Yeah, she got me. Dolores says, great to see everyone. Yeah, it is great to see everyone, isn't it, Dolores? Uh, I'm sure that the attendance at these streams will be growing because people will be used to, when to expect them. We'll be on the lookout for them. And I think because we're handling so many different kinds of subjects now and following them within the empowering democracy framework from the viewpoint, okay, of that particular framework, uh, that is going to bring in more people, or so I hope anyway. We shall see what we shall see. So, tomorrow, I will try my best to do a stream in the morning. If I don't get there in the morning, I certainly will get there by the early part of the afternoon. And I'm going to try to do a second stream. Not try to do, I'll do a second stream in the latter part of the afternoon. I'll try for 3 p.m. if I can fit the really good news in there at that time. And then there will be a 9 o'clock show as well. And that will be most probably about an hour, okay, or thereabouts. So there will be many subjects to talk about, but tomorrow, for example, I'll probably be talking about what's been going on in the area of absolute alarm that the interest rates are going up and what that's going to do to our fiscal picture. And it's not looking at the interest rates from an individual standpoint, but looking at the interest rates from a standpoint of what will happen to the federal budget when the interest portion of the federal budget tends to increase because the interest rates, okay, have increased. There are all kinds of forecasts about this. Like I think now we're paying about 400 billion a year. Okay, the federal government is paying 400 billion a year, and some people are, predicting this is going to go up to 2.7 trillion dollars a year. And woe is me, what's going to happen to America if that happens? And then I'm also going to want to discuss this week, probably tomorrow, how we need to put the Supreme Court in place. And there are other good topics like uh, the influence federalism is having on the war for democracy, because don't be mistaken, folks, we are fighting a war for democracy now. And many will say that we are losing it. And of course, we have to do something about that. In the election coming up, there's likely to be a lot of controversy, okay? A lot of people who don't want to admit that they've lost, and a lot of fights about whether they've lost or not, lots of legal actions. And we don't know what kinds of things are going to be pulled by state legislatures, what they're going to try to do. There are some outrageous things they may try to do, maybe total chaos. So we have to talk about what's going on at the state level and how that relates to the federal level. As I think I've explained to you before, we won't be doing much on foreign policy in this particular show. We love foreign policy, of course. And by the way, we expect that Brandy, Kay, and Dolores will be launching a foreign policy show soon, which we, by the way, are very much in support of. We have so much to cover here domestically. There's so much happening on the democracy front here that we don't think that we have the bandwidth to cover the foreign policy. And there are many, many streamers right now doing a very good job on foreign policy to try to counter what can only be called the lies that the mainstream is telling about the foreign policy. So, for that reason, we're not going to cover foreign policy. We're going to leave it to them. And we're going to make sure that we cover very well the struggle for democracy that is happening here. We'll be discussing, of course, uh, what is likely to happen if the big lie concerning who wins and who loses elections continues. And of course, we're also going to be discussing a little later this week the continuing role of big money um, in politics. You're seeing it right now, of course, in some of the election campaigns. Okay, but this week there's something ridiculous happening out, okay, in Oregon, and we're going to talk about that, okay, too. So those are some of the coming attractions, and so I hope to see you all tomorrow. Uh, I also want you to keep in mind that the fish rots from the head. I will be talking about that sometime in the next a few days. So, on that note, I think I am going to say good night. Huh? Oh, I think Bonnie is reminding me about my Patreon account and asking that people uh, every once in a while ought to visit the Patreon account.
Again.
Now, there's some people who don't want to visit it because they, think to commit to a monthly contribution is not something they want to do. Okay, I have to say two things about that. Okay, the first thing is you can go to Patreon and you can make your monthly contribution, and then you can immediately discontinue it, so that you're not actually making a monthly contribution, but only a one-time contribution. So that's one point. But a second point is you can also visit my Buy Me a Coffee page, okay, and buy me a coffee, okay, on that page, and that is always a one-time donation. So yeah, I certainly would appreciate those. Uh, and I'll be seeing you then with 3 shows per day for the rest of the week. I hope you enjoy more frequent scheduling. Alana asked, did I see Larry Summers' tweet? Well, Larry Summers tweets about, okay, a lot of things. I think Larry Summers is always wrong. Now, some people will say, well, he was right about the inflation. The reason why, I would say that he was wrong about uh, the inflation was when you make a prediction from a scientific point of view, you have to come out with the right outcome for the right reasons. If you get the right outcome for the wrong reasons, you haven't scientifically predicted that outcome. You were just lucky. Larry Summers was right about the inflation, about the occurrence of the inflation, but not for the right reasons. So, from a scientific point of view, which is supposed to be what economists think they are, uh, he did not make a prediction that was a correct one. He got the outcome right, but he got the reasons wrong. And Lana Dell says, yes, Larry the loser. Larry the loser, good. Sandy says, cool, congratulations, Brandy and Dolores. Kay says, yes, Lana. And Kay Ryan says, love to hear that, Brandy and Dolores. Yeah, the fish rots from the head. You've heard that before, Sandy, haven't you? Russell Goldman says, good night, Joe and Bonnie.
Good night.
Hey, Russell, I didn't realize you were here. Yes, but it is time to say goodnight. Kay says, good night, all. I love you all, and we love you too, Kay. And Dolores says, thank you and good night. And Lana says, this was a direct statement, I think this is Larry Summers, about how lower wages are needed. Oh, Larry is such a bastard. He's just a bastard. He really is. And he's a bastard who is full of shit. Sandy says, Joe, keep an eye out before the mail. I certainly will, Sandy. And Russell says, I've been quiet. Sandy says, hi, Russ. And Lana says, good night. And Sandy says, good night, everyone. So I'm going to end now. I'm going to end now, folks.